We've all used AI as a tool, a better way to summarize a report or polish an email.
But in 2026, that's changing. We're moving from AI as a software feature to AI as a coworker.
It's a shift that's rewriting the human-in-the-loop model, reworking internal carbon pricing, and reshaping how the C-suite breaks down silos.
Today, we're going behind the scenes at Davos to talk about the friction between promise and productivity.
This is the pre-read. Just like the slides you get before a big meeting, the pre-read prepares you, CFOs and other executives, for the next big thing. It's the global podcast where finance, sustainability, audit, and risk teams come together in the C-suite.
If you're making decisions at scale or need to understand the leaders who are, you're in the right place. This is the pre-read brought to you by Workiva. I'm Steve Soder, accounting enthusiast and Diet Coke aficionado.
And I'm Alyssa Zucker, sustainability nerd and equal opportunist caffeine addict. And we are once again joined by Workiva CSO, Mandi McReynolds. Mandi, welcome back.
So good to be with you, Alyssa and Steve. And of course, I'm still doubling down on my coffee.
Well, welcome back to our audience for the third and final episode of our Davos Debrief miniseries. In the first two episodes, we talked about the certainty gap and ROI heresy. But as we close out our coverage, we're shifting from the risk landscape to the human landscape. So, Mandi, you dug into some unspoken truths at Davos. Can you unpack it for us?
The unspoken truth of Davos 26 is that our next top performer might not be human. I sat down with leaders who were moving past the AI hype into the hard work of actually reimagining their workforce.
Ooh, well, that sounds a little bit ominous and scary. So let's flesh that out a little bit. What were some of the highlights from that conversation?
It can sound almost apocalyptic, but let me be really clear. Each of these leaders brought key takeaways for us to consider. It's shifting from AI as a tool to AI as a collaborator. 2026 marks this really incredible transition forward around agentic AI that performs autonomous work. It captures true value that leaders must move beyond 20% efficiency gains to actually reconstructing or reimagining their workflows. In fact, one CFO, she had a visioning exercise with her team saying, imagine a $10 billion company being run by one person and 40 agents. That's inspiring to think about. We also talked about what's human-led mean in this AI-powered leadership. Despite exponential growth in machine capabilities, the North Star for C-Suite remains, we must be human-led. This requires a radical focus on learning and development and change management. It gives employees the confidence that their roles are evolving, not disappearing. One of the comments that was made off to the side is, how do we make sure every employee isn't minoring in AI, but majoring in AI? The other piece that we saw is people are breaking down the silos. Successful AI includes sustainability initiatives, requires deep integration from the CFO, the CIO, and the Chief Sustainability Officer. By engaging CFOs, they are becoming executive champions for environment and technological goals. So those are the main takeaways we see.
All right, and we start with Costi Pericos, Global GenAI Business Leader at Deloitte. Costi argues that 2026 is the year we stop seeing AI as a glorified spell checker and start seeing it as a real teammate. He's already seeing firms fuse their HR and AI departments because, as you mentioned, in a decade, the definition of coworker will be fundamentally different. So let's get to it.
I would say that 2026 is going to be the year we learn to collaborate with AI. When you look at where we are in business and AI, a lot of people are now using AI. We recently released a survey where the number of businesses and number of people in businesses using AI has gone up by 50%. But what they're really using it in is really as a tool, maybe help write their emails better, summarize reports. It's not really collaboration. And with now the advent of agents, if you're going to really take advantage of that, you need to redesign work. And actually, in that same study, about 80% of the leaders admitted that, they're not really redesigning work or changing the nature of work for us to take advantage of AI. So I really think this is the year where we will accelerate and maybe stop seeing AI as a tool, but a collaborator.
We talked to CEOs, CFO, chief sustainability officers, chief risk officers. I think you're exactly right. They kind of started out with this idea of like, okay, what can I do within the manual day-to-day of my job, but not necessarily think about it from the tool of what's the job to be done and what can accelerate.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is once you start thinking of AI as a collaborator and thinking of reimagining a particular process, so not taking the 10 steps that humans do and say, let's make each step 20% more efficient, but reimagining it, you end up into all sorts of conversations. What does it mean for the workforce? The agents that we have that can now go and do autonomous work for 30 hours. Well, who controls them? Mm-hmm. Where does a human come in the loop? How do you explain that to a risk officer who's already having challenges with the current risk aperture in AI to say, well, we're going to introduce autonomy? So it's a really huge transformational subject, which I think has additional levels of complexity. But I think the benefits could be enormous, for business as well as for humanity and society.
So let's unpack that a little bit more, particularly as we think about data. I would love to understand your perspective on data, just because what we're seeing from CFOs to chief sustainability officers to the chief risk officer is they don't really trust the data. And the data has to come from a deep trusted source and to be ready for board decision usefulness, disclosure to investors, something that is audit ready. What is your perspective and take on how these executives from these three areas could really come together and see a unified data?
I think data is one of the two biggest ingredients in being successful. The other is humans, of course. And by the way, I completely agreed with Jacob Andra in your previous podcast in December when he was saying the importance of having data in the enterprise and being able to move away from siloed. And the same is true for AI. You need to break down the silos. Now, a lot of the work that we see with clients is around enabling the business, the data in their business to serve AI more effectively. Mm-hmm. And, it's not a case of boiling the ocean. It starts again, understand what workflow you're trying to do, understanding what that looks like, reimagine, and make sure that the data that you provide to that is of the appropriate quality. Now, you would rightly say that's easier said than done, Costi, and it is. But we should also recognize that the great advantages of vast volumes of data is that you have an equalizing effect, right? So if you can feed an AI algorithm, 1,000 reports, if there is some inconsistency in one or two, it gets evened out by the rest who are right. And so the large volumes that can be processed is a mitigating factor. But, you raise another point, which is you need to have the right risk management, the right red teaming, the right contributors, to get that the sort of broad diversity of views that you need in the data in order to be able to make the decisions.
I was listening to a CFO yesterday at the Deloitte house, a session around this idea of financial transformation and how AI is really coming into their organization. And I loved that in that conversation, both the CFO and the Deloitte team really unpacked. There are a lot of real world friction points happening, especially in the organization as you as an executive are trying to roll this out to build up your people, prepare for how the fundamental years of workforce, your first 1 to 2, 3 years as an accountant or a person in sustainability is greatly shifting. So what's one piece of advice you would have for those executives listening in as they think about tackling this major financial transformation of our time?
Look, I think it's really important for executives to set a North Star, even if we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, for what the business in the future looks like. In Deloitte, we say we're human-led, but AI-powered, but we will always be human-led. Yeah. And I think that is important because, jobs are going to change, but it's not going to be like the machines are going to be taking over and they're going to be working for a firm of robots.
What we're fundamentally saying is your two major skills in the next 2 years are thinking about learning and development, unlike any other time in your career. Absolutely. And thinking about change management.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And, you talked about kind of learning in the early years. When we talk about human in the loop, that normally assumes is a human with experience that has done the kind of, grunt work that AI does and kind of knows when things go wrong. I'm a coder. I'm playing with the coding tools all the time these days, and they do amazing things, and then they go off and do something really stupid, right? and unless you have that experience, you don't know how to do it. So, I often say that I'm not sure how the future will look like, but you are going to have apprenticeships where you learn without AI so that at some point you can be the human in the loop and coordinate and govern AI.
As you think beyond this time period, so let's say you and I, we've both been to Davos twice.
Yeah.
Let's say we're here a decade. What do you think is going to be different in that conversation?
Oh, that is a great question. That is a great question. Look, I think, to follow on from the theme. And by the way, 10 years is such a long time.
I know.
In an exponential
You and I
growth.
would be in different jobs making different money if we could predict that.
For sure. Humans are not great at predicting exponential growth. But I think we are going to, it's probably two things. I think AI by that point will not only be learning from human data, but will actually be discovering things. So we're going to see an acceleration in discoveries like we haven't seen today. And I think that's going to be a topic of conversation. But I also think that we are going to be talking about AI much more as co-workers than we are today. And I know that's pretty difficult to imagine, but, we're already seeing some companies have fused their HR departments and their AI departments together because they reckon that it's soon going to be part of the same thing. So I think we're going to see it in a much more collaborative way than we see it today.
If Costi is calling out a shift in identity, then Dennis Woodside, CEO of Freshworks, is identifying a massive friction in the habits of how we work. Dennis works with customers around the globe, and he's noticed a recurring pattern at Davos, a massive top-down desire for AI efficiency that hits a wall in the messy details of execution. He argues that the biggest barrier to the teammate model Costi describes isn't the software. It's the struggle to change how we actually work every day.
My company works with about 75,000 customers around the world. What I hear is a lot of top-down desire to use AI to become more efficient, to grow faster, but the execution is actually really hard. And getting people to really embrace AI in their day-to-day work, getting them to change their work habits, how they think about their job every day, that's actually really hard and takes a lot of time and a lot of focus and a lot of energy.
And I love how you're explaining that. And what's one piece of practical advice? So you have your own executive team that you're really trying to push them to break down these silos that you typically see when it comes to AI.
I think it starts from the top. So I personally use Lovable to create an application that allows everybody to understand their compensation better, send it to the HR team and said, hey, why don't we just scale this up for the whole company? And that's what we're doing now. So I think the leaders have to embrace these tools and show the organizations that they can use tools like Lovable, ChatGPT, Gemini to make their lives a lot easier and to actually get work done. Most of our customers are mid-market companies. Think of a company that's got about 5,000 employees. One I like to reference is Vermeer. They're a wood chip manufacturer. They make the wood chippers that people use in yards and so forth. Been around 100 years, and really for AI to have impact, it has to have impact for that kind of a company. And that's hard because these companies have been around a long time, they've been successful for a long time. But it's exciting to see when they actually do adopt AI through our tools and other tools and actually make their business more efficient or enable them to grow fast.
So we have a vision of AI as a coworker and the reality of the execution gap. To bridge the series full circle, we looked at how unifying the C-suite actually bridges that divide. Dr. Marcia Balisciano, a board member of the UN Global Compact Foundation and leader at RELX, shares a masterclass in collaboration. She didn't just ask her CFO to approve AI and sustainability budget. She asked him to lead the mission as a chief environmental champion. It's a blueprint for the integrated office of the CFO and how we've been discussing all week. We started by discussing real-world benefits that she had seen in implementation of AI.
I think that there is a real opportunity as the world recognizes to deploy AI. How do you do that? And where are you going to see the returns? I've got a real-world example from RELX. And that is, we serve customers in about 180 countries. So that's amazing. And they are contacting our people around the world. We've got 36,000 plus of them, and they're asking questions. We are in their supply chain. They need to know that we are holding the same standards that they set. So they are asking for information, for requests for information, requests for proposals, contract renewals. That's a lot of work. But with AI, we can accelerate this. So a really big win for my team coming up is the creation of an agentic tool where colleagues can get this information far more quickly. Now, there always is going to be a special case where we need to run some data that's specific for a particular customer, and that's no problem. But if we can make this faster, then there's another fringe benefit, I think, which is building relationships with those customers. Because when we talk about shared value, we build deeper connection, and that really is a win-win. Win for the customer in terms of finding ways that they can work more closely together, and certainly for the customer-facing staff, building a better tie with their customer.
I love that real life example. And I think what we're finding, especially as we talk to executives and board members like yourself, when you design AI for the job to be done and you're really thinking about how can this whole new system work, you're seeing outcomes increase. We're seeing if you trust the data behind it, then the desired outcomes increase. But it's really shifting how executives are working together. I know you and I had this conversation as well, because now you're seeing that there has to be this breakdown silo between the chief financial officer, the CIO, and the CSO in order to move this forward. So as you think about your company, you as a board member, what's one practical piece of advice you think those listening in should say, this is how we do it to really get the job done?
Engage and engage. So when my chief financial officer joined the company, I knew that he came from an energy intensive sector and that he would have some very good insight as it related to environmental matters. And I sat down with him and I said, we would like you to be our chief environmental champion. And we were very lucky. He said yes, and he has been really outstanding and helping provide really good perspective on things. So we wanted to set an internal carbon price. This is a real price that we charge the business. We are scaling to $60 a ton in 2026, on our way to 2030 at a minimum of $100 a ton. And he ran cover for us and gave us the ability to really drive this forward. And there are other great examples. He is chairing a network for our events business, RELX. So we are one of the world's largest events organizers. And there is a real impact from holding events. And so we signed up to something called Net Zero Carbon Events, and our CFO, Nick Luff, has been meeting on a periodic basis. We've dropped down to quarterly because we've made really good progress working with fantastic colleagues in RX at the senior level, the CFO of that business, the head of operations, the head of sustainability, to put out a first, to get data, because we didn't have data, we didn't know, going out and building conversations with our venues so we know about their energy and their waste so we can calculate that emission. So there's some really wonderful things, I think, by engaging, because you as the CSO cannot do it. You need everybody. And in fact, I think we're so lucky, aren't we, Mandi, because our jobs, we can see across the whole of the organization in a way sometimes that other functions can't. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be the chief cheerleaders and chief engagement people as well.
From the macro risks of misinformation to the ROI heresy and the human coworker, the message from Davos 2026 is clear. The office of the CFO is being re-architected in real time. And it's no longer enough to be a steward of the past. You must be the architect of an agentic future.
Well, Mandi, thank you again for your reporting from Davos and for joining us for this entire miniseries.
Thank you all. And I just want to call out that I had the pleasure of joining Dr. Balisciano on her podcast, The World We Want, which can be found as a free resource center on RELX.com.
Thank you again to our guests, Costi Pericos, Dennis Woodside, and Dr. Marcia Balisciano.
This has been the pre-read brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, sustainability, audit, and risk.
We've got more insights and hot takes coming your way, so be sure to follow or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your edge.
If you liked the show, leave a review, send it to someone you love, or just shout it out on your next team call.
We'll see you next time, and until then, go lead it like you mean it.
I'm Melissa Zucker, and that's Steve Soder. Our lead producer is Mike Ravagno, with additional production support by Renee Lee and Mandi McReynolds. Audio engineering is handled by Tanner Heinrichs.
Pedro Sousa is our graphic designer. Transcripts are created and edited by Courtney Kimsey, and thanks to our digital and social team, Mike Berg, Katie Carr, and Michael Karnowski.